Senator from Clarendon, what purpose do you rise?
Thank you. Mr. President, I heard what the senator from Beaufort just said, but I was wondering if he would yield for just maybe a couple of questions based on your interchange with the senator from Charleston,
yes.
Senator Kempson.
Yes.
And I think in one of your responses—
Senator yields.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Senator, yes.
I think in one of your responses to Senator Kempson's question, you mentioned that the South Carolina Medical Association helped draft this legislation, or what did you say about the South Carolina Medical Association?
In connection with this bill and in working on this bill over time, there are various groups that have opposed the bill. Law enforcement, Palmetto Family Council, South Carolina Medical Association, solicitors. My point there was that, like with the solicitors, the South Carolina Medical Association didn't stop with, we just don't like the bill. They actually sat down with me and went through the bill and helped me and educated me as to, if you're going to have a process whereby a physician does an examination of a patient and ultimately gets to a point when they're going to certify whether medical cannabis can be beneficial, these are the sorts of things that a physician would do in order to reach a medically reasonable decision. And so they helped with the language. I don't mean to imply by that they became a supporter of the bill, Senator Johnson, Senator from Clarendon,
okay.
excuse me.
Yes.
What I'm saying is that's another example of constructive engagement by a stakeholder group that had concerns about the bill. That was my point.
Okay, good. I'm glad you clarified that, did you know, because I didn't want to confuse anybody to make them think that the South Carolina Medical Association was in favor of the bill.
No.
And I think I'm correct, am I not, that they are against the bill, as is the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, the South Carolina Pediatrician Association. So these medical associations, I think I'm correct, in addition to the South Carolina Medical Association, are in opposition of this bill. Am I correct?
Well, if you want to go through a list of the groups that are for or against, I can do that. It's going to take me off my...
No, don't. I just want to know. You actually answered my question, because when you responded to him, I thought that it may have been misconstrued that the SCMA was in favor of the bill. And I think you responded to my question that they just sat down and just kind of gave you some input as far as what they thought would make the bill better, but not that they were in favor of the bill. And I didn't want anybody to think that to misconstrue your comments as them being in favor of this piece of legislation. So you actually answered my question, and I appreciate it.
If I said that, I misspoke. I don't think I said that.
You did, and I just wanted to make sure that we clarify that so nobody else would get that impression, but I appreciate you responding to my question.
Let me finish this thought before it escapes me. Those associations in favor would include the American Academy of HIV Medicine, the American College of Physicians, the American Nurses Association. I've got about 15 other groups as well. So, but this really isn't about, lining up associations like it's a football game and see who can bowl over one or the other. I think it's fair to say that different groups and different individuals have different views on the use of medical cannabis in a medical context at this point in time. I guess my point would be not that there isn't reason to oppose the use of medical marijuana. You can make, and we're going to hear from opponents of the bill, examples of instances where marijuana can't help with cancer, or marijuana doesn't help with chronic pain, or marijuana can lead to the exacerbation of psychic disorders, or marijuana can do other negative things. And my point to that is, all that's true. I'm not holding marijuana out there as some sort of panacea that can solve every medical ill under the sun. What I am saying is it is an important tool and option to give physicians in order for that physician to determine, and sitting down right across in that very personal relationship with a patient, giving that physician that option if that physician believes it can help that patient. So I'm not going to say marijuana doesn't have negative consequences. I'm not going to say it has uses in all those qualifying conditions. Different people are going to respond in different ways. I guess my point is, we need to go ahead and get out of the way as much as possible from that physician sitting down with that patient and those two individuals deciding, what that patient is going to take to improve their life. And I guess my point would be, it's not the proper role of the state. It's not the proper role of law enforcement. It's not the proper role of the religious community to step into and interfere with that relationship between a physician and patient. I mean, to me, that's basic. And so, no, marijuana is not perfect. Yes, people can have adverse consequences to marijuana. That's why we have such a detailed requirement in regard to what that physician has to do before he or she authorizes a patient to take it.
Thank you, Senator. And the comment you made a while ago about people not interfering with the medical doctor and his patient was an argument I made on another bill. But since you brought it up, I think the bill, or there is an impression or an assumption that medical marijuana helps with cancer. I don't know if it does or it doesn't, do you know? But I do know that the American Cancer Society's position is that it does not.
Let me be clear about what I mean when I say cancer, okay? Because the studies that I have, the peer-reviewed studies that I have saying it could be medicinally efficacious is in regard to the aftermath of chemotherapy, in terms of stimulating appetite, in terms of addressing nausea, in terms of addressing chronic pain. So I would agree with you in terms of the cancer itself, which is what you're referring to. There's not the peer-reviewed evidence that it can kind of, abate cancer or cause it to go into remission. What I was referring to is, and this was the case with Bill Herb Kurzman's brother who died of cancer, the only thing that kept him going and stimulated his appetite and got rid of the nausea was marijuana. And so and when I talk about cancer, it's in that context, okay. not the right. Curing of cancer.
So are you saying that was the only thing that kept him going was medical marijuana?
In terms of his quality of life, in terms of his ability to enjoy life in the months that he had after having kidney cancer, you can talk to Representative Herb Kurzman about that, but that is my understanding. Okay.
So one of the other illnesses that's on the list, I think I read in this bill, is glaucoma. And were you aware that that the American let me get this right, Ophthalmological Society disagree with that as far as whether marijuana helps with glaucoma?
And that's a fair point. And one of the amendments that I'm putting up, because I went back through Senator Johnson, Senator Clarendon, in looking at this bill, and you're right in regard to glaucoma, because even though it does have the effect of relieving pressure on the eye, which of course is something that can mitigate glaucoma, there are prescription drugs that are efficacious in that respect to the degree that marijuana is not. And so even though, again, for purposes if it were my preference, we'd let a doctor do whatever he or she thought was in that patient's best interest. But I recognize that what we're doing here is that we're defining a set of conditions and providing some guidance initially, empowering doctor only in a limited way. And I say to that, what I was going to do is look at the conditions for which there is substantial peer-reviewed study that shows it can be helpful. I agree with you that glaucoma does not reach that level. And that's why I have an amendment on the desk that takes that out as a qualifying condition.
Now, one more, and I'll take my seat, because I know you want to finish your presentation.
Fine. This is helpful. This is
another condition that I think I saw in the bill that medical marijuana is supposed to help with deals, I think, with psychiatric or either mental issues. Are you aware that the American Psychiatric Association said this about medical marijuana? It says medical marijuana for the treatment of psychiatric problems is no better than providing cigarette smoke to cure lung cancer or lung disease.
But that's not one of the qualifying conditions, okay. Senator.
Okay.
I mean, again, let's just go through them since I'm at the section now anyway. It's the definition of debilitating medical condition. That's in section, the very first section, 44-53-2010, subparagraph 8. Cancer. And again, I qualified by my answer there about cancer, multiple sclerosis, neurological disease or disorder, including epilepsy, glaucoma, we talked about glaucoma, post-traumatic stress disorder, Crohn's disease, sickle cell anemia, ulcerative colitis, wasting syndrome, autism, severe or persistent nausea, a chronic medical condition causing severe and persistent muscle spasms, and any chronic or debilitating disease or medical condition for which an opioid is currently prescribed. So that's the universe of conditions and doesn't include the sort of thing that you're referring to there.
Well, Senator, I thank you. I have some more questions, but as I said, I don't want to interrupt your presentation, so I'll save those for another time. Thank you.
But again, that was very constructive. Thank you.